In this section, we will look at how we can do this infinite scroll using React Query. So in this particular demo, you can see that as and when we click on this particular load more button, more and more data is getting appended to the previous list. So this is what we will first achieve. So once we learn how to do this, with a few additional tweaks, we can do it very similar to how, let's say, Instagram does it, where you just scroll to the bottom of the screen and it automatically appends data to the existing list. So we will see both of those use cases in this section. So let us get started. So to save us some time, I've created a very simple component called infinite queries, and all that it does is fetch data from the fruits API and then list it out. As simple as that. So as you can see right here, we are using the use query hook. We are only passing in the fruits item instead of the query key because we're fetching the entire list right here. And as usual, we are rendering the page is loading and the error message based on these booleans. And finally, we are listing it out. So knowing how to fetch an entire list from an API is something that we're super familiar with at this point. And just like how we did it the last time, we have added a route for this particular infinite queries component right here. And that is exactly what we have here as well. So if I go back to the browser, you can see that we have a list of all the fruits right here. And the CSS is because I've just added a very simple class name here called fruit-item. But right now, we are not interested in fetching every single item in a single fetch. Let's say, for example, we only want 4 items to be displayed in a single page. And then there could be a button below it. And there could be a button, let's say, called load more. And when the user clicks on that button, another 4 items gets fetched and gets appended to the previous 4 items. And the same thing keeps on happening. So to achieve the infinite scroll functionality, there are a couple of things that we might have to change in this component. Step 1, instead of the use query hook, we have to use another hook called use infinite query. So let us remove this from the import. So this is step 1. And step 2 is always remember that anytime we're using use infinite query, the query function right here is always going to receive an object. And inside of the object, we get the page param property. This value just means the page number. This denotes if we need to fetch the first page or the second page or the third. So if we come back to the paginated queries, let's copy this entire string right here, paste it here, because we will have to use the same string. In this case, we get a default object inside of which we have the page param, and that is what we have to use right here. We can still leave the limit here to be 4. Step 2 is done. And step 3 is, whenever this particular component gets mounted onto the DOM, we need to tell React Query that the first page that needs to be fetched should start from 1. So to mention that, this takes in another property called initial page param, and we can set it to 1. Step 3 is done. Let us move on to the final step. The last step is to add another method right here called getNextPageParam. And this is a function which takes in 2 arguments right here. The first argument is going to be the last page, and then the second argument is going to be all pages. I will explain to you what each of these parameters mean, but on a very high level, let us look at what this method actually does. So the getNextPageParam method only has one function. It is to calculate the next page number. That is it. If the next page number does not exist, if it has reached the very last page, then it should return undefined as the next page. I hope that makes sense. It has 2 parameters. So as we saw right here, it has 2 parameters, and the first one is the last page. It contains the entire API response of the last most recent data fetch. So you can imagine the data to be an object which has the data property, the status text, headers, configuration, everything. Now, the second parameter is all pages. This is an array of objects. Each object is the entire API response of all the past data fetches. So based on all this information that we have to calculate the next page number and return it to use query. If the page number does not exist, then it is undefined. Based on the API intelligence on what the next page is. So what this section of the line means is, if the API were to support pagination, along with the response, it also gives you data about the next page. But in our case, the JSON server does not give us that information. So we have to do manual calculation. the next page needs to be calculated and returned from the getNextPage param method. We know that we have a total of 20 items, and we also know that at any certain page, we only show 4 items, right? So in total, we have 5 pages. And we also know that this all pages contains all the pages that have been fetched so far. So we can do a very simple calculation here, saying that if the length of all the pages is less than 5, then we can just return all pages dot length plus 1. But if we already have all the 5 pages fetched right here and the length is already 5, in that case, we can just return undefined. All right, so let's remove this. And since we're not using this last page, we can just put an underscore right here. Perfect. So step 4 in setting up use infinite query is also done. So let us actually save this file and give this a whirl. Okay, you can see that we are getting some errors saying that it cannot read the map. So it is saying that the data cannot be read. And this is because the data that use infinite query returns is going to be a little different from what the use query hook returns. So let me illustrate that by logging this to the console. So let's log the data to the console. And if I come down here, and now you can see that we are actually getting page params and pages inside of an object. And this pages is what we're interested in. As you can see, this is an array of pages. So this is the first page, and each page will have 4 items of fruits, right? So this is what we want. So if we fetch another page in the future, then that is going to be the second item, and that is also going to have 4 items inside of the data property. So we will have to make some slight changes to how we are rendering this data. So let me remove this, and I can say data.pages, and I'm going to loop through all the pages right here. So this could be each page. And now we are going to loop through the data property inside of each page. And I can say dot map. And now we have each fruit item. And now I can return a div here. Let's also add a key saying fruit.id. And inside of here, I can mention the name of the fruit. Let's also add a little bit of class name here. So I can say fruit.item. And this is a styling that will already be present in the app.css file. So let's save this file and let us see if it is actually getting listed properly. Perfect. Right now you can see that we have the first 4 items getting displayed. So the first page is properly getting fetched. Now let's add another button right here called, let's say, load more data, which is going to fetch the second page and append the data to the first page's data. So let us go ahead and add the button right here. So we can say something like load more data, or let's say just load more, and let's define an event handler, and we need to call a method which is going to trigger the next page's data. Fortunately, the use infinite query hook provides access to a method called fetch next page. So we can copy this, put it inside of here, and this should do the trick. So if I come back to the network tab, if I click on load more, you can see that the second page is getting fetched. And similarly, if I click on it again, you can see that the third page is getting fetched. Click on it again and the fourth page, and click on it again and the fifth page. But if I click on it again, there isn't going to be any more API calls, because right here in this condition, we've said that if the length is going to be greater than 5, we have to return undefined, because we only have 5 pages worth of data. So we also have to disable this button when we've reached the 5th page. So fortunately, the use infinite query hook also provides another boolean right here called has next page, which is going to tell you if there is a next page or not. So we can come down here, pass in the disable property, and we can say if there is no next page, the button should be disabled. So if I refresh this page, this is the second page, the third page, the fourth page, and finally the 5th page, and now the button is disabled. So everything is working as expected. And if you're curious about when each of these methods get executed, the exact sequence of how these things get executed, let us quickly discuss about that. So the first time the component gets mounted, the data is fetched with the default initial page param to be 1. And as soon as the fetching is done, the getNextPageParam method gets executed and quickly stores the next page value internally. So you can imagine, as soon as the first page's fetching is done, the all pages is going to have one page fetched so far. So since 1 is less than 5, so 2 is saved internally. And when the load more button is clicked on again, this fetch next page method is called. The saved value 2 is sent to the page param. And the same cycle continues until the last page is reached. And that is how simple it is to do infinite scroll in React Query. So far, we have used the button to do infinite scroll. In the next section, we will see how we can automatically fetch data as soon as the user scrolls down to the bottom. So I'll see you there.